Our speaker today is Marci Bowman, the importance of your ancestry. And a growing number of adoptees are seeking to learn more about their heritage, their family history, and possibly reunite with birth families. And birth families are looking for their children too. Marci will discuss the rapidly changing laws regarding birth and adoption records and the many breakthroughs for the adoptee in DNA technology. Marci Bowman and her husband, Bill Sanders, retired in Mexico 6 years ago. She worked as a project manager, trainer, and technical writer for IBM before she retired. Lakeside, she's been active in the Genealogy Forum, DAR, as genealogy columnist for the Lake Chapala Review, and as volunteer at Lakeside Spay Neuter Dog Ranch and Cruz Roja. Let's welcome Marci Bowman.
Thank you. I hope, the microphone is working. Can everybody hear? Okay. And if we put our notes upside down, it's going to make it harder. Okay. Oh, and it didn't print that first. Well, okay. Can you imagine every time you walk into a room or a large gathering of people, you subconsciously look around to see if anyone looks like you? Someone might be related. Adoptees are in reunion, whether they are formerly seeking or not. There's an increased interest among adoptees in finding their birth families, in opening the birth and adoption records, and an increased interest among birth families in locating lost family members. Now, not all adoptees want to learn about their birth families, and not all first mothers want to locate their adopted children. But for everyone that doesn't, there's one, or 5, or a dozen, or 100 who do. Finding unknown fathers is a slightly different issue. It's fairly common. People trying to locate, the mother either won't admit or pretends not to know or has lost touch with, or whatever the father. Who is my father? Who knows? No say. But a lot of the same techniques, research techniques, work. As one of the first mother bloggers commented, it's a difficult situation. This isn't all rainbows and unicorns. But, this cut off the top of a lot of these. This is not going to be helpful. I can wing it. I can kind of remember what I wrote. And you don't have, every adoptee does not have to look for these things. Will you find, if you do, will you find your birth family? Maybe. Will you find these things, but you have no chance if you don't try. If you look, will you always find your family history? Maybe, at least some of it. If you look, will you always learn your general ethnicity and perhaps something about your family tree? Very possibly. You can. Are all reunions happy, positive events? Unfortunately, no. There are deep-seated emotional baggage on both sides, but most of the parties say they are glad they tried and glad they learned what they did. The term emotional roller coaster is used by almost every person in a search and reunion, and for good reason. This is not an easy topic. It's not. There are a lot of emotions that people haven't acknowledged, and when they do, it's difficult. It seems to me that there are a dearth of saints in the adoption process, and way too many inaccurate stereotypes. Birth mothers are not all drug-using teenage sluts. Many would have kept the baby with a minimum amount of support and encouragement. Birth fathers are not all young men who ran away from their responsibility. Many didn't even know about the pregnancy. Adopted parents are not all fine, altruistic people who provided a father knows best home life for an unwanted child. Many, many are. I've known many adopted families who were just wonderful people. But we had a neighbor who was the kindest, dearest person when he was sober. When he was drunk, he was mean and abusive. This happens too. Adoption agencies and placement services do not always have the best interests of all concerned. The adoption industry is a business, after all. And closed adoption records are a fairly recent phenomenon. It happened in about the 1920s, 1930s, when they started closing the adoption records so that people couldn't see them, so that they weren't open. Commonly used terms: the adoptive parents or adopting parents, the adoptee, the child who was adopted, adoptee access or open records movement. This is the movement, these are the people who are trying to open up the records so that adult adoptees can have a chance for looking at that, can have a chance for learning about their families, about their heritage. Birth parents, or birth family, or first parents, or natural parents, these terms are all used. The triad is the adoptee, the adoptive parents, and the birth parents. And what you want to do is take everybody into consideration, all three parties, because they all have different needs and desires, and so trying to balance the three is very important. Well, I know that many adoptees are worried that their birth parents will be hurt. They wait until the birth parents have died before they start their search. Unfortunately, this frequently means that their parents have died as well. Why do people search? What are the reasons? To learn about one's heritage. There's sort of a need, we have a need for learning about our roots, for understanding who we are, and our ethnicity, a little about our family history. Sometimes people have health concerns. And this is something there are a lot of, we're learning more and more about which health issues are genetic. And are there concerns that you might be aware of or that you should be familiar with? Reactions to drugs, for example, or a propensity to a certain disease. You can change your lifestyle, you can be aware of it, and this is good to know. And the story behind the adoption, the whys. Why did this happen? Why was I abandoned? You know, why did this, and this is, again, if you talk to adoptees, you find that there are some deep-held feelings sometimes of abandonment. No matter how nice people are, no matter what you tell them, why did this happen? Why did this person give me away? Why me? So sometimes just finding out, talking to someone, having them tell you what the circumstances were. Why? Where do you start? First, do your research. First, it's important to understand the issues and the problems you may face. And this is for both the adoptee and for the first mothers. Because some of you may have seen the film Philomena. The woman finally decides that she wants to find her child, birth child. And it's, again, not everybody feels this way, but an awful lot of women say, I just want to know what happened. I want to know if the child is okay. I want to know if they've made it, if everything was good. Just, I know they're not going to look like Brad Pitt. It's okay. I want to know I just want to know. So it's important to understand the issues and the problems. There are many, many books and blogs. So read some more. Look on Google and Amazon for terms like first mother adoption, adoption reunion, birth family. There are so many books. One that has been recommended over and over is, good, I didn't write it down, I can't remember it. Anyway, Primal, anyway, there are quite a few of them. Some of them, you'll find them, there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, a lot of shame, and you have to get past that and realize that if you start reading the reunion stories, there are an awful lot of very happy people. a lot of people who found something that they really wanted. Consider joining one of the DNA adoption Yahoo groups. There are a couple of them, and they are not just for DNA testing. It's a good idea to start with the birth records, start with the adoption records, find out as much as you can, and then go and look to start searching. Do this before you consider DNA. There's a wonderful caring community of people who have already gone through the process, people who will help, and people who know know a lot of the little tricks and where you can find information. It's a good idea to work with an experienced person. They're sometimes called adoption angels. They know the ins and outs of the various states and the various agencies. Their help can be invaluable. There's a patchwork of laws regarding adoption records. In the United States, every state and every Canadian province has slightly different rules. So you have to know each state, and you have to know to determine where you were born. It may not be where you think you were born. The date you were born may be wrong. But you have to figure out the state where you were born and the state where you were adopted in order to find the records. Some states have open records, sometimes by date of adoption. I haven't quite figured that one out. Colorado, for instance, has this little gap of about 10 years where if you were adopted during those years, you can't see the records, but before or after you can. I have no idea if somebody thought that maybe they sired a child during that 10 years, who was very high in the government. I don't know, I wouldn't have asked them. But anyway, a few states, about a dozen states, have open records, and a number of Canadian provinces. Some offer an intermediary to connect two willing parties. They have a person who will try and find the birth family, work with the adoptee, and try and get the two together. Some have active registries, so that once you put your name in, they will look through the registry to see if there's anybody there. Most of them can't afford it, they're underfunded, and so they have passive registries where it's kind of a chance that you would connect through the state. And some have veto options, various veto options, so that if the parent says that they don't want you to find out the information, they can veto. They can say, I don't want this person to know. I don't want this information. Some have what they call non-identifying data only. But even this can provide clues, and this is where the adoption angels can help. And a few have no post-adoption programs at all, like the state of New York, where you can't find anything legally. England and Wales began keeping adoption records starting in 1926. And since 1975, all children over the age of 18 who were adopted since 1927, not sure why that year gap, may request their birth records. In Scotland, before 1930, adoptions were arranged mostly on a private basis, either by individuals or charitable adoption agencies. So there weren't state records. But after 1930, records can be obtained through the General Registrar's Office for Scotland. Northern Ireland, from 1931, records can be obtained from the General Registrar's Office in Northern Ireland. And the Republic of Ireland, the Adoption Authority of Ireland will assist adopted people, parents who have placed children for adoption, adoptive parents, and natural family members of adopted people placed for adoption. So a lot of times it's not just the person who's the birth parent and the adoptee. There may be siblings who find out. I want to know. They want to find this other child. They want to get to know their half-brother or sister. Sometimes it'll be aunts and cousins who have known about it, who they would like to connect with this family member. So there's a wide network of people out there who might be interested. In most states, adoptees are at minimum entitled to non-identifying documents. Non-identification document is what it's called. This usually comes from the agency or the state. It's information from the original interviews with the birth mother or the birth parents with some details, such as names and dates of birth, redacted out. In a few states, you can order a copy of your original birth certificate and sometimes the adoption records. Keep in mind that these records are not always honest, just like any other record. I mean, are birth records always honest? No. People shave dates, people change names, people do all kinds of things. But you know, that's the better chance of getting the information. And most of the time it's right. Some records are available through the adoption agency or orphanage or hospital where you were born, if you can determine that. And reunion registries are another source to consider. There are many, and some of them cost. I would suggest not starting with the ones that cost. There are two that come highly recommended. The International Soundex Reunion Registry, the ISRR. You have to fill out and mail the form in. It's not exactly high-tech, but they will actively compare and try and find a match. That's the ISRR. Adoption.com registry is another good registry where you can search and add your information. It's important to keep your contact information up to date and current. If you change your email address, it's not going to get to you. Got to remember to do that. Also, many states, as I said, sponsor registries. They're usually underfunded. They're rarely useful to use, easy to use, but it's worth having your name there. Now, adopt the DNA, the new resource. And people are finding, lots of people are finding things they didn't know, people they didn't know about. It's a surprise. There was a story not too long ago in one of the newspapers about a young man who says, I gave my parents the gift of divorce. It turned out he'd given both of his parents the tests, to take the test to find out about their heritage and their families and so forth. And it turned out that his father had sired a child prior to getting married. And apparently the rest of the family felt this was totally unacceptable. And now the father is no longer accepted, no longer spoken to. The young man, and it was, you read the story and you want to slap that kid. Anyway, I mean, I won't go into it. But anyway, so things sometimes happen, and this is something you have to be aware of. There are 4 types of genealogy DNA testing. The National Geographic Geneographic Project for Human Migration, known as Geno 2.0, shows ancient migration patterns, not generally useful for adoptees or genealogy, but very interesting to show the way that your tribe, you came out of Africa, across the continents, into wherever they ended up. The next is Y DNA. This is only males, the father line. It's potentially very useful. I'll show you a chart in a minute. MT, or mitochondrial DNA. The test can be for both, is the test for the female line. Both males, men and women can take this test, but only the woman passes the mitochondrial on. So it's only the female line. The newest, the most recent, is autosomal or AT DNA. And potentially, it has matches for up to 8 to 10 generations. Very useful for adoptees and for genealogy. DNA is a very potent resource for reuniting with families. They use a cheek or they use spit or a cheek swab. No blood, no doctor's offices. You just spit in a little tube or what do you know, with a little scratchy thing. The first genetic genealogy DNA test for Y-DNA was offered in 2000 by Family Tree DNA. And this was for Y-DNA. 2000, 14 years ago. In 2005, the National Geographic launched the Geneographic Project, Human Migration, and used this to learn more about early man and their migration patterns, less than 10 years ago. In 2010, the first autosomal tests were offered by 23andMe and Family Tree DNA. Last summer, they announced that they had tested the 1 millionth person. Now, this is all 3 DNA tests. The 1 millionth person had been tested. This summer, the 2 millionth person was tested. Now, out of 7 billion people, this is not a lot, but it's a good start. Very briefly, I'm going to mention haplogroups. Haplogroups is one of the things that you would find out from the Genome 2.0 test and from some of the other tests as well. Think of haplogroup as your tribe. This is the large group of people who all migrated together out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. Some of them went over into Asia, in through the Fertile Crescent. Some of them came up and went over sea. You look on the map, and it's a lovely map with lines, bright colors, and so forth. My particular one is I to be blah, blah, blah. We were Phoenicians, probably, or something. We came by sea and came up through Scandinavia down into Europe and so forth. The map reflects human migration over the last 70 millennia. During that period, humans migrated from Eastern Africa to inhabit every continent on Earth except Antarctica. As they spread out geographically, they also diverged genetically. Whoa! They diverged genetically at a relative constant rate. Now, you have a much better chance of finding potential cousins if you have colonial U.S. or Canadian ancestors. For example, over 50% of people in the United States do. They have colonial ancestors. I couldn't find a statistic for Canada. I would believe it might be a little smaller since they have a smaller population going in at that point. If you have ancestors who came to the United States or Canada recently, not as many of them have been tested, so you're not going to have as high a chance. You have a better chance if some of your ancestors came from European countries or from Africa, where there's been a great deal of testing and a great deal of interest. Well, for example, Finland, who would have thought? Finland has a surprisingly high number of people who've tested. So if you have Finnish, you're going to find all sorts of cousins. Sometimes you may just have to be patient. I had a cousin tested for my Y DNA because I couldn't be tested. And I had to find a male paternal cousin. Now the first man to Y DNA test on my father line tested in 2008. He had a very limited tree back to the 1850s. And then he waited. In 2011, several other descendants were tested. A couple of the women who were on this project, the Bowman DNA project, completed his tree and compared it to ours. And we've had a few more people tested, and now we have 5 descendants to 3 of the sons going back to the Reverend Jacob Bowman from 1718. Unfortunately, we still are waiting for the person to test, either Swiss or German, we don't know, who goes back to the old country. We're waiting for that one person to test who's traced his family back beyond the United States, beyond Pennsylvania and then Virginia. It'll happen. We're patient. Another million or 2, and maybe one of them will. Okay. Now what I'm going to show you, this shows you, this is the line. Okay, this is the brother who can take both. This is the sister who can only take the female line. This is the father line. This is the only people who are being tested. None of these other people out here. And this is the mother line. Just this line here. So you've got all these other people, but we'll talk about them in a bit. The Y chromosome only men have, It tests the father line, and as a surname is passed down from father to son, so is a Y-DNA. In the countries that use surnames, it can be very, very useful. In countries like Sweden, where Esteborn's son was Johann, and Johann's son was then Peter, and Peter's son, anyway, you can find the line, but it's going to be a lot harder. If you're very fortunate, you have Spanish background, where they use both last names. It's really nice for genealogy. Because the Y chromosome mutates slowly, it's sometimes possible to match with others of the same or similar surname to find a common ancestral line. The numbers will, I mean, if you look on a chart, it's pretty fascinating to look at all of the different, well, we've got a chart of all of the Bowmans, who mostly became Bowmans. And there's there's over 100 that have tested. And there's just this one little swatch where we all match on everything. And that's us. That's Jacob Bowman's children, descendants. Sometimes an adoptee may discover his biological surname by testing his Y-DNA and by finding distant cousins. Not always, but it happens. The only company offering Y-DNA tests with the opportunity to compare your results with others is Family Tree DNA. They also have by far the largest databases. Ancestry was giving Y-DNA offering Y-DNA and mtDNA testing until a few months ago. Much to the dismay of their customers, they discontinued it, they threw out all the results, and they took it off their website. There are a lot of very unhappy customers. Anyway, Family Tree DNA offers 3 levels of DNA testing. To give you an idea, 37 markers cost $169, or $150 if you're in a surname project. If by chance you have gotten your father's name, possible name from the birth certificate, or join that surname project, you can get a cheaper rate, and they will help you with working out the chances of who you are and which line you belong to. 67 markers is $268, 111 markers is $359. These tests are not cheap. We tell people to start with the 37. You may need the higher resolution, but you might not. Now, Family Tree DNA has frequent sales. They always have a holiday sale starting in November where the prices are quite a bit cheaper. Mitochondrial DNA. This is that mother line, that red line down there. The mtDNA only tests the mother line. Your mother, her mother, and so forth. The test can be taken by either sons or daughters, but it's only passed on by the mother. It's called, the technical name is the mitochondrial DNA first full genomic sequence test. The mitochondrial DNA rotates very, very slowly. So the changes are much, much, much more gradual. This test, this is the best we have right now, gives you a 50% chance of sharing a common maternal ancestor within the last 5 generations. Pretty good. This is 125 to 200 years maybe. The other 50% gets the closest match in about 12 generations, which is probably not going to be very useful because we don't have records going back that far. The problem in most European societies, other than Spanish, the woman changes her name to her husband's name. So even if you find a common ancestor, tracing your particular line can still be difficult because you have to look at all the daughters, all the daughters, all the daughters to find a potential match. The full sequence mtDNA test with option to match distant cousins is only offered by Family Tree DNA. Again, the cost is $199, and it sometimes goes on sale for $169. It's not as useful, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, autosomal DNA. Autosomal DNA, as I said, is very, very new. They just started it 4 years ago. And there's over 1 million people have tested just in that, in just the autosomal. It matches small strings of DNA that have been passed down intact from distant ancestors. You receive 50% of your DNA from your mother and 50% from your father. About 25% from each grandparent. It may be 20%, it may be 30%, but about 25% from each grandparent, 12.5% from each great-grandparent, yada, 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 all the way down. Now, with ATDNA, you have an 88% chance, probably, of matching someone in these 6 generations. That's a lot of folks. If you're an adoptee, you can possibly match, you can find people who also match a particular ancestor. You find a bit of DNA, and then you find 3 or 4 people who also match on that particular section of DNA. And if they all have an ancestor, a common ancestor, a common family, you're related to that person. You're related to that family. So you've got something. You may not have this yet, but you've got something out here you can start working down. The tests compare your results with all the others who have been tested by that company. And this is something to keep in mind, unfortunately, to locate distant cousins with common ancestors. Now, each of us has 23 pair of chromosomes, 22 of the autosomes that are tested there, and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. The man has the X and the Y, and the woman has 2 copies of the X. Remember that all of our chromosomes come in pairs, and we inherit random bits. You can't tell from the results which random bit they came from. Without doing additional testing of other cousins and other relatives, you can't tell whether this little bit of random DNA came from your mother's side or your father's side, or where it came from. You just know that that's a relative somewhere. And based on the amount of shared DNA and the longest string, companies kind of guesstimate the cousin level for a possible match. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But this is where people have suddenly found a first or second cousin, for example. An adoptee suddenly looks and there's this huge, long string, and this is a relative. And this is somebody who could be very close. And it doesn't happen all the time. But they say that the adoption age page says that they're finding several a week now. It used to be 1 maybe a month. But it is happening. Each generation you inherit a little less from each ancestor. And the process is inherently random. So you may inherit something from 1/6 great-grandparent or 8th great-grandparent and absolutely none from another. Think of it as the DNA lottery. You don't know what happened. You could inherit a whole bunch from your mother and very little from your father, or vice versa. For an adoptee, the process consists of finding common families and ancestors among your matches. DNA adoption offers a wealth of tools to help you with this process. To be honest, it is tedious, it is time-consuming, but the results, at the very least, can create a partial family tree. At best, they can find your birth family. These are the 2 resources that I would suggest starting with. The International Society of Genetic Genealogy, ISOGG, and DNA Adoption. Again, they have all sorts of resources, and it's not just for the DNA testing. Come on, stick tape. There. Anyone considering a DNA test should be prepared for an unexpected result. You may not be who you think you are. If you aren't ready to consider that some of the family legends may not be true, this is not for adoption necessarily. You are not descended from King Reginald X, or a Mayflower passenger, or a Cherokee princess. Don't take a DNA test. You may find or be found by people you didn't want to find. If you don't want to be found, don't take a DNA test. And hope your cousins don't either. Because DNA tells you what is, not what you want to hear. there are 3 companies who are offering genetic genealogy DNA testing. All 3 offer the ATDNA. Family Tree DNA is the only one now that offers the Y-DNA and the mtDNA as well. There are other companies offering these, but they don't offer the ability to compare your results with large groups of other people. So while they're moderately interesting, they're expensive and they don't really tell you very much. Don't waste your money. All of these charge $99 for the autosomal test. They have frequent sales. I've seen them, $79 is fairly common. So it's something that figure $99 is pretty much the base price. Now, 23andMe has the largest database. And until very recently, they offered health reports in addition to genealogy data. They have a higher learning curve, but they offer a wealth of evaluating tools and the most accurate ethnic predictions. They can tell you where your ancestors were 400 or 500 years ago. So you can get an idea of, by comparing all of the other people in their database, they can tell you roughly where your ancestors came from, and roughly what the percentages are. This should all be taken with a large grain of salt, but it can be, particularly the little tiny, I have 1% of this. But the big ones, you can learn quite a lot. Hopefully they will work out the issues with the FDA and offer the health report again. Rumor says that what happened was that 23andMe changed legal firms. And when they changed legal firms, the old lawyers didn't bother to tell the new lawyers that they were supposed to be in contact with the FDA and were supposed to be providing information. And so their information wasn't provided. The FDA said, "What happened? Why are you ignoring me? What's going on?" And so they shut down the testing, and hopefully this will all get worked out. The one thing is that more customers are interested in health than genealogy, but they have a wealth of useful data and useful tools to work with for the genealogist as well. Now, just briefly mention, while the health test reports are not being available at this point, Prometheus is a low-cost database that provides some health information for people who have tested with 23andMe and Ancestry. So you can get some idea of some of your health risks. It's not as detailed as the 23andMe report, but it is available. Family Tree DNA has the largest database overall and recently reached a total of 1 million customers. So they have half of all the customers. They have a robust chromosome evaluation tool and excellent customer service. Their ethnic predictions are considered the weakest. Nothing's perfect. But their customers do have a high level of interest in genealogy. Ancestry.com DNA tests are fairly recent, and they have the advantage to being frequently linked to family trees, some of which are quite accurate and well researched. And some of them are not. Some of them are simply somebody copying onto the mistakes of others, and this is where you find that, oh yes, you are related to Marie Antoinette, because all these trees say so. And they're all wrong. But anyway, they have no chromosome matching tools and low minimums, so I've seen it estimated that up to 60% of the matches are bogus, which is a little frustrating. And their ethnic predictions are improving, but they are still weak. Now, if you're an adoptee, they recommend that you test with all 3 companies and upload your results to GEDmatch, which is a free database that allows you to compare data from all 3 companies and offers some additional tools. To those who've updated the data, it does allow you to evaluate the Ancestry DNA results for everyone from Ancestry who has updated their information. There's also Family Tree DNA will take the results from Ancestry. You can transfer your results over at a lower cost for $69 instead of having to take all 3 tests. Anyway, and sometimes they even have a sale on that. Very quickly, privacy. People ask about privacy. Honestly, none of these tools, none of these tests will allow someone to see your entire genome. They can see just the part that they share. And quite frankly, no one cares who your grandfather was. So there is a very slim chance that a really disreputable insurance company could attempt to find out your health issues, but it's pretty unlikely. They would be a violation of federal law anyway, but it's pretty unlikely. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Well, first of all, thank you for doing what you love to do. It's real obvious.
Thank you.
You certainly had my attention. And secondly, it's real obvious to me why I'm attracted to coming here to Mexico. And that is that the Mexican people, the Spanish people, are, they have that safety measure of being connected, you know, because everybody knows, you know, so there is that sense of I'm okay. And it feels good being in this, you know, I'll say ancient old. And also that I think with all of this testing, where it's going to go, because I've always known this without knowing it, is that we're all connected.
Oh, yeah.
And there's going to be that that thing that it's proven that, and it's going to change our attitude.
One hopes.
And then, oh, it will.
That when people realize we all came out of Africa, all of us. All of us.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's see, the other was, yeah, well, in 1989, my wife at that time and I adopted Andrew. Signe, my wife at that time, was a licensed clinical social worker. So we had available to us Andrew's history. I don't know what it was like actually in 1989, whether a lot of this stuff was...
Depended on the state.
Okay, so this was Florida, and we, through Signe, had all the information available. At one point, I thought it was like, oh my God, this is horrible, you know, what's coming up. But now that Andrew is 30 years old and has gone through that whole process of, you know, I'm bad and wrong, this and that, he's had the experience of, you know, being tossed by his mother, being rejected. He was 4.5 years old when she, you know, literally put him out. You know, I don't want this kid. You know, like a year later, after finally connecting with her and the family, she wanted Andrew to come back and, you know, visit or whatever. So we let it go, and he went, and there was no communication. We were writing, calling. So I let it go for like 3 or 4 months, you know, just kind of backing off. And then we got the call, you know, get this son of a bitch out of I hate the bastard, he's not my son. We went to pick him up, and he was bloated and all white and puffy. But anyway, it was, you know, so he got to be rejected again. And went through, you know, just an amazing process. And here he is at 30 years old. I mean, this kid is awakened. I mean, he's like, I am so delighted that he knew experientially what was going on in his life. So, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Over here. Here, in the pavilion.
Ah, hi.
There are those of us in the pavilion.
Yes.
This is a question about the adoptee.
Yes.
I can see that if you were adopted in the U.S. or in Canada, you might have an, I suppose, chance in hell in finding your birth mother. But there have been a lot of international adoption. Is there anything happening that would help those who were adopted from overseas be able to find out anything about their birth parent?
There are organizations within the particular countries who are working on this. Very slowly, there are people testing in these countries, and there's a slim chance. It's much less likely, I'll be honest. It's much less likely because a lot of the records are even scantier. But there are associations in a lot of the countries where there's been a lot of adoption, and there are people trying to help the adoptees reconnect. And someday maybe all of us will have tested our DNA and we'll be able to find each other. Yes, there was a question. Oh, yes. Cousin Bob.
Yes, Marci usually tells the story. I came to the genealogy group and sat down, and sooner or later they ask you what families you're working on. And I said, well, this, that, and the other in the wine family. Marci said, well, I'm working on that family too. And turns out we're about 7th or 8th cousins.
Wait.
Yeah. The second thing is that as a therapist, I worked with a number of clients who were searching for their birth mothers, and I can give you one story to counterbalance some of the difficulties in this gentleman's story. A man who found his 30-year-old son in the city that he grew up in. They formed a very close relationship between not only himself but his grandchildren and the adoptive parents and the whole family that gets together in that town. So he didn't gain just one child, he gained an entire family that a lot of love seems to be exchanged there.
I had a friend as well who's very close to her daughter's to her daughter's birth mother. And the whole group, you know, they're a very close family, and is extended to the birth parents as well, and it's been very successful.
Well, it's slightly different, but would it be possible to have a child DNA tested before you adopt? Because we have friends and who have adopted children, and they come with fetal alcohol syndrome. And it has been a hell to pay, you know, throughout. And some commit suicide, and, you know, the worst scenarios you can think of. So, you know, if you want to adopt, would it be possible to request that the child be tested before?
Well, a DNA test wouldn't show that, but other tests I would think would. And this is a huge problem, because crack babies and fetal alcohol syndrome babies are broken. I mean, they're really broken, and it's horrible. And people I've talked to said they're not sure that they can ever be fixed. Hopefully, with enough therapy, they can. But it's a very difficult situation.
I just have a story about my DNA testing. My surname is Carter.
Ah, not so common.
Well, but what I found was that I was connected a lot of people that were surnamed Adams.
Oh.
So there's a oops someplace in the family tree. But I was actually able to, with conventional genealogy, I was able to find out where one of my great-great-great-grandmother was in the same little town in North Carolina, and in fact her cousins were Adams that were all related to this other family. So I was able to trace my family tree back through the oops and understand exactly how the Adams were related. Turns out that Henry Carter was her sister-in-law's husband that they must have named the child after. So it's really surprising what you can find out, not what you expect.
Ah, yes. Ah, yes. More than we all have this image of our saintly great-grandparents Sometimes it's right. And particularly if you notice that the father was away at in the war, you know, Benny is from heaven. The old jazz song.
Thank you very much. Would you tell us when your group meets, if people would like to pursue?
Yeah. Well, we meet on the last Monday of the month, 2 o'clock 2 to 4, over here, right here in the Sala. We welcome anybody who wants to come.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wonderful. A couple of quick things. One is Lori Brown, that spoke here a couple of years ago, will be back to give a recap about her experiences living, surviving through the killing fields, and how it is today. The other thing is that last week, Ross had mentioned, after the talk of Bob Miller's, that people might want to see a video called Zeitgeist, much about the origins of religion and some other things. Some people said they would like to have those. I brought copies today of, it's called the Zeitgeist Trilogy, because the original Zeitgeist was in 2007, and then last year, 2013 or so, it was updated, and then they added another section called The Future, or What's Coming. But anyway, the one that is really pertinent to Bob Miller's talk last week is a section called The Beginnings of Religion. And it goes back to ancient times. So those copies, I brought some copies of both of those today. And if you would like to just make a donation to the Open Circle, that's fine. If there are not enough copies to go around, then let me know and I'll make some more for next week. I have 10 copies of Beginnings of Religion and 12 of Zeitgeist Trilogy. So thank you very much for coming, for your attendance. Hope you come back next week. Oh yes, if you would put your trash in the cans and stack your chairs, that'd be great.
I'll stay if there are any questions for a bit.
Yeah, Marci says she will stay up here if there are any people who want to follow up with questions.